What's going on, folks? Nate here at Tool Dyno Works, and I actually pulled our GSX8 out of the corner because our Yoshimura exhaust system that we've had on order, I think, for like 2 months, has finally shown up. As you just heard there on the video, it is loud, but it looks fantastic. The fitment is great, and the finish on it is just, well, what you'd expect from Yoshimura. It's quality stuff. And the necessary fueling to get this thing back to an appropriate AFR target was actually quite a bit different than some of the other pipes that we had seen before. But how did it perform at wide open throttle? Because that's what everybody's going to know and everybody's going to ask. Well, I'll show you. Now, we've got our TST intake kit, so that is their lid and velocity stacks installed, as well as DNA air filter. And once we got the fueling properly dialed in, this bike is now making just under 87 horsepower and about 60.5 pound-feet of torque to the tire on pump gas. And if you compare that to how the bike was bone stock, the improvements are absolutely massive. And just to recap what that really looks like on paper, that is our bike stock run for the red lines there. It was making 76 horsepower and 53 foot-pounds of torque to the tire, again, completely bone stock. And with the proper intake and exhaust system installed, as well as our custom ECU mapping here at Tool Dyno Works, the bike's making almost 87 and 60.5 or so. That's gains of 14 horsepower at the very top end and through the mid-range there at around 7,500 RPMs, and gains of about 8 to 10 foot-pounds almost everywhere throughout the entire RPM range. Now, I'm sure tons of folks are going to want to know, how does that actually compare to some of the other exhaust systems out there? Because again, I know most of us in the GSX8 community have been waiting on these Yosh pipes for the last 2 months with big hopes of them performing fantastic. Well, let's just compare it to something like the full Acura, which was the best performer ever on our dyno, and see what the two look like. So run 33 is what we have currently on the bike, and run 28 there, the red line, is the full Acura with the same intake and obviously our ECU mapping to match. And the Acura is just still a bit better than the Yoshimura pipe. Peak power, you're talking about a difference of like 1.2 horsepower, but there at around 8,500 RPMs, we've seen this with some other systems, there's just a bit more of a pronounced dip before the power curve starts to flatten off, and the Acura just simply doesn't have that. Now again, that dip is there right before the power curve starts to just sort of flatten out on a lot of systems that are available for these bikes, but it's not there for all of them. And the best guess that I have is, really when it comes down to it, the outlet diameter of the muffler on the exhaust system. This Yoshimura system does not come with a baffle. There's a provision for one. You can see a hole down in there that you could potentially get a baffle in. I'll have to see if they actually list one on their website. But without it, it just does create that dip, which again, we've seen on several other systems out there for these bikes that do not have a baffle. That is an absolutely enormous outlet. That is something that we would see, again, on like a 1000, like a ZX10 or an S1000 or a CBR. And it's just a bit large for the output of this engine. But, as I've said I don't know how many times, do not get lost in the weeds over 1 or 2 horsepower variances from one pipe to another. Something more than 2 horsepower is significant. 1 or 2 ponies, you are absolutely not going to feel. Your butt dyno just is not that well calibrated. So if you've got one of these new Yoshimura exhaust systems for your GSX8, whether it's the S like I've got behind me, or the R model, look no further for proper ECU mapping than ToolDynoWorks.com. We've got mapping now built for the TST stacks, and we'll also go ahead and build it for the stock intake with the normal snorkel modification that everybody does on these bikes. And as always, if you have any questions whatsoever about getting your GSX8 properly tuned and dialed in, do not hesitate to email us at support@ToolDynoWorks.com, because we are always happy to help.